So in today's video, we're going to look at and react to 12 minutes of pilot UFO testimony. And let me just say before we get into the video that I've been fascinated by the UFO phenomenon for the better part of 25 years. Ever since I saw the first episode of X-Files, I was hooked. I needed to find out what's going on. And I read every book that I could find, watched every documentary. Whenever I heard anything about any case, I had to follow up on it. And after 25 years, really, I came to the slightly sad conclusion that 98% of people who are in the field of UFO and claim to be ufologists or whatever it is are imposters. There's a massive industry of people just telling UFO stories to others because people like to hear them, and you just have to be aware of this when looking into this subject. You know, I don't want to give any names, but there are so many people out there who just try to make a buck, and they go to all these UFO conventions and hold lectures for the sake of holding lectures and just telling stories because people like them. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just something you have to be aware of. Looking at the subject of UFOs, it's a bit like walking on a minefield, okay? Because most of it will blow up in your face if you look a little bit deeper than what the guy says. It can easily be debunked, okay? And part of the reason why that is because the average person like you and me, we're not trained observers. Okay, we are not trained to observe objects in the sky. So when trained observers like pilots or military staff see something, they might say, oh yeah, that's clearly a drone, that's clearly a plane, that's clearly a satellite, or that's a geological phenomenon. There are so many options that might blow our minds, but trained observers will understand quickly what it is. And that's why, in my opinion, the video we're going to look at holds much more credibility than a lot of the videos that you see, for example, in the r/UFO subreddit, where people just post anything and they're like, oh my god, aliens, and it's clearly just a freaking balloon hovering over your city, okay? Often it's debunked. Nothing against that community. It's actually a pretty good community that often tries to bring sense to the table and make sense of what people are posting. But everything you see in that subreddit, and especially in UFO documentaries, and that people say, you know, people like Dr. Stephen Greer, for example, you know, I don't want to put him on the spot here, but a lot of the stuff he talks about is just, it's way out there and disconnected from any form of reality. I mean, he does these desert tours where he takes people out in the desert for a lot of money, wealthy people, and then claims that he makes contact with aliens in the desert. And there are some people who say, yeah, I joined that tour, I paid for it, and actually I saw something. And look, it's all a big money-making machine. I'm not saying there's no credibility to anything the guy says. I mean, he did the Disclosure Project, if you're aware of that, which is a lot of credible people talking about that. I think that was in 2001, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, let's get into it. I just wanted to give this really short disclaimer and say that a lot of the stuff we're going to look at now is way more credible to me than a lot of the lectures and stories that are out there that are being posted by people like you and me. All right, so the first guy that's going to talk in this video is Sir Chichester, I believe, and it's actually interesting because he's followed up by Kenneth Arnold. Kenneth Arnold, if you're familiar with the subject, he is the man who co-coined the phrase flying saucers. He was supposedly the first guy who saw them in like flying in a formation over like a mountain range in the US. So he's the second guy talking. Actually, Sir Chichester, as OP, who actually kindly put this together, Ramsey2907. I appreciate the work, man. You're doing a good job putting this together. I'll link this post down in the description so you can go there, give an upvote, and show the man a little bit love for the work. But Sir Chichester, the first guy that we're going to see now talking, actually had his encounter 16 years before Kenneth Arnold, okay? So I don't know if he's the first guy who ever saw and reported UFOs. I don't know. He had his sighting in 1947. Let's get into it.
It was a perfect shape. It was shaped sort of like a pearl with a tail. And I watched this thing, and suddenly it disappeared. And I thought, well, am I seeing things? I'd had a very grueling flight. I had engine trouble, and I'd been waiting for hours, expecting to go into the sea, you know. However,
I love how he's like just in such a matter of fact way. He's like, you know, I had a really grueling flight. I had engine troubles, and it was basically for hours just waiting for me to hit the water at some point. So, and then I saw this object, and it's like other people would freak the hell out about this, but he's just like, you know, it's part of flying, you know, that's what happens.
Suddenly this thing reappeared, coming towards me, and I thought, well, I'm not going to let it go this time, and I kept my look fixed on it, and it approaching fairly fast, and then suddenly gradually rather, it began to thin out, and it vanished in front of me, and before my eyes. It became a sort of ghost. I could see the water, the waves of the sea through it for one instant, and then it vanished.
Here we've seen some.
So that's interesting, right? Because keep in mind, he saw this in 1947, I believe, 1946. And that is way, like the way he talks about it is the black and white footage. If you would say it now, it would be kind of in line with what a lot of people are saying. This kind of camouflage phenomenon is described by a lot of people who are trained observers and see these kind of UFOs, including the famous Tic Tac UFO sighting by Chad Underwood, which, by the way, is a great interview on Joe Rogan, where he's like, I believe, a military pilot, and he talks about how he saw this. How he encountered this Tic Tac UFO that flew around, knew its cut points and blocked the radar and did all kinds of insane things. Very believable report as well. You know what? I linked that down in the description as well. If you haven't seen it, check that out. But I like how matter-of-factly he describes the whole thing. Okay, he's very focused on the facts. He doesn't say, aliens, you know, he's like, I saw this thing, it looked like that, and then it became translucent, and I couldn't really make out what it was, and that's the end of the story. He's not amplifying it, he's not trying to dramatize it or sell anything. It feels like he's just telling this story. It's like a trained pilot would tell a story like this. Anyway, we're moving on. This is Kenneth Arnold.
Something, I've seen something, hundreds of pilots have seen something in the skies. We have dutifully reported these things. And we have to have 15 million witnesses before anybody's going to look into the problem seriously. Why, this is utterly fantastic. This is more fantastic than flying saucers or people from Venus or anything, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh boy. So big difference here, the way how he talks compared to the first guy. I mean, obviously, Kenneth Arnold was a real pilot, and it's a legendary sighting in the field of UFO. But like something that still stands out to me as I watched it is like how desperate he is that people should believe him. He's like, how many sightings do we need, huh? Until someone really looks at this. And come on, guys, we really... Less credible than the first guy, you know. Obviously, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Kenneth Arnold is American, so obviously American culture dramatizes naturally a little bit more. He is maybe just the kind of personality who dramatizes these kind of stories a bit more, but it just stands out to me when compared to the first guy, how he's very emotional about this, which is usually something that trained pilots are not. Moving on.
July the 24th, 1948, two experienced commercial pilots, Clarence Chiles and John Whitted, were flying at night over Alabama when they encountered what they described as a cigar-shaped object, perhaps 100 feet long, flying faster than any aircraft they had ever seen. It had, they said, 2 rows of windows, and they could see lights inside, and orange-red flames shooting out of the tail.
That just sounds like a rocket. Right? I mean, not all rockets have 2 rows of windows with lights inside, but that very much could have been an experimental rocket from some enemy force, or we don't know. I mean, especially with like an orange tail in the back. It was elongated and had an orange flame in the back. I don't know, man.
Air Force investigators couldn't explain it.
It could not possibly fly unless it had an engine in it that was beyond anything anybody on Earth could make.
The Air Force investigators trusted the testimony of these experienced pilots and were forced to consider the incredible.
March the 12th, 1977.
So I think this is already like a new case now. They're jumping a bit. I mean, it's edited together, obviously, so you got to watch out a bit. They jump from case to case rather quickly, and you got to pay close attention in order to see when they're moving on to the next
Flying
one.
a trip from San Francisco to Boston, now stopping at DC-10.
It was an Airbus 320, and we had 24 passengers on board with very good condition. We were at 39,000 feet.
We were just north of Dallas-Fort Worth. It was a beautiful, clear night.
Out of nowhere, some lights appeared. Looking over to the left of me, just to the north of me,
I noticed a red light of some kind to the the distance off our port side, our right side.
And Larry says, well...
Port side? Is port side not the left side? And he might have just mixed it up, but... Or am I wrong here? Leave that down in the comments. If he said port side and then he said the right side. Anyway.
Keep an eye on it. He says, well, now it's coming at us. So...
And they began a turn from pointing directly at us in an echelon sort of a turn away.
It was not a plane, it was not a weather balloon. It was huge, absolutely huge. It was dark red color. And so this object began to become transparent and it disappeared.
So the cloaking thing again.
It was absolutely crazy. Crazy.
It just was gliding through the sky so quietly, and as it did so, it blotted out the stars behind it. And it just reminded me of a submarine in the depths when it's quiet and just kind of motoring right on through, you know?
Right, that is super creepy. That is such a creepy... I mean, a lot of these pilots say there were these lights and they flew around the ship. I mean, at that point, you could potentially talk about, I don't know, drone technology, maybe something geological even. It could be other things, but a big object, I mean, if this animation that they did there is accurate, that hovers in front of your ship like a submarine in the deep sea, that is just giving me goosebumps, man. That's scary, man. That's real scary stuff.
There were no wings, there were no windows, and it was cigar-shaped.
I saw what I saw, and this thing was not from here.
I watched this big, gigantic light go out behind our left wingtip, and then as the turn progressed, it disappeared in the distance off to the back at a very high rate of speed.
Right, you see, much less credible. Like, and I'm not doubting that he saw what he describes, but to assume that that is some kind of artificial controlled aircraft, if it's just a light that flies alongside of your ship or your aircraft and then disappears into the distance, it could literally be some kind of lightning phenomenon that is just extremely rare, and even you flew 30,000 hours, spent all in the air, you might just encounter that once in your lifetime. And it's extraordinary, but it's not a freaking cigar-shaped object that goes alongside your aircraft and looks like a submarine in the deep sea. Okay, there's a bit of a difference in intensity between those two reports.
I've flown all the jets. I flew in the war. I flew B-17s in the war. Everything. I've got over 30,000 hours of flight time, and never had a sighting as that one. So it was once in a lifetime.
Then I noticed that it pulled up alongside my left wing.
We're in mono now.
It was a bullet shape, rounded at the front, that widened out and then tapered to a point at the end. And it made an instantaneous 90-degree right angle turn, and it went vertical until it went up out of sight. And I sat there looking at it, and I didn't know what to think.
5 minutes later, Shannon saw the object again, and it repeated the same pattern. Only this time, two pilots flying in the opposite direction also saw the UFO.
An artist conception. I wouldn't have known if you wouldn't have said that this is an artist conception. I would have thought it's the real footage. I mean, this is an old documentary, so they didn't have the special effects they have today. It looks like garbage. But anyway, it looks like a inverted bullet or something like that, right? Quite interesting.
I have to, to the best of my knowledge, rule out any kind of meteor or shooting star, because I don't know if any meteor that will come alongside, pace you, and then take off forward and go vertical. Okay? Any kind of spacecraft or military aircraft, technically that was defying all physical laws by making an instantaneous 90-degree turn. According to laws of physics, that can't be done.
Okay, look, I understand it flew beside him, right? But he describes it to like a meteor, looking a bit like a meteor. I don't know how close it was. Obviously, this is a very close, like a very short takeout of this interview. But I remember like this famous tether incident and some of the footage that the ISS filmed, some of the satellite footage we get there. You see objects kind of penetrating the Earth's atmosphere and then going back out of the Earth's atmosphere. And what happens there, as described by NASA, is that objects, if they come in at the right angle, they can literally bounce off the Earth's atmosphere. That is something that happens. It's a bit far-fetched to say that this is what he saw, since he says it flew alongside his aircraft, but that is something that can also be mistaken for, you know, a controlled object if it bounces off the Earth's atmosphere. And maybe it was far enough away that he literally witnessed a meteor that just bounced off the Earth's atmosphere. So this is something you would also only see once in your lifetime, probably, as a pilot. And even when you are a trained observer, it's something that can leave you flabbergasted, right? And confused. I don't know. I mean, he described it in a lot of detail, the way it looked. But he also used the word, it looked like a meteor. But so, don't know.
It's a very special experience for me.
Yes, I'm sure. I'm sure.
I mean, check the guy out. He's close to tears, okay? He hears his own radio call from the time, and it brings back the memories of what he saw. And he's close to tears, man. This is an intense moment for him, right? So immediately, either he's a good actor, or, and I don't know why he would act, like what is he gaining from it? Maybe he gets paid for this interview, I don't know. But looking at it, a little bit more credibility there.
This is the amazing story of Carlos De Los Santos. From his testimony, Carlos reported seeing two grey objects about 4 meters in diameter, each with a small cabin, like a cockpit or a windshield. A third object appeared in front of the plane, heading straight for Carlos.
Me espanté muchísimo. En mí, en mi familia, en mis padres. Yo traté de virar. Allí fue cuando me di cuenta que tuve un completo control de la aeronave.
Carlos immediately started to lower his altitude as he began to approach Mexico City Airport.
Amazingly, Diaz remembers.
That is incredible. I mean, imagine that. I don't know if he's speaking the truth, but having these two objects, I don't think if he said that, but in the video they showed it left and right from his aircraft, 4 meters in diameter, really close to his aircraft, and then another one just shooting past him, going over, and he's lost control over his aircraft. And that explains the emotion that he showed, being nearly close to tears, because that's like nearly a near-death experience, okay? If you lose control over your aircraft and you see these weird-shaped crafts left and right from you and shooting over you, you're like, okay, that's it. I don't know what this is, but I'm probably going to not make it out alive out of this thing. So that is like a worst-case scenario for any pilot. That is insane.
Seeing another blip appear on his radar, an object flying near Carlos's plane, just as Carlos reported.
Era un eco de algún objeto que estaba volando en esa área. De eso no cabía la menor duda, porque cuando nos llamó más la atención y nos desconcertó fue cuando inició un viraje de 270 grados por la izquierda en un radio de 3 a 4 metros.
I just have to point out this annoying music and these annoying sound effects that they put over all these UFO documentaries. It's like, why do you have to dramatize it so? It's already unbelievable enough, like, and crazy enough as it is. You don't have to put all these moronic sound effects over it. That's just stupid, and it really takes away, in my opinion, from the believability and credibility of all these documentaries, because at that point it just becomes entertainment and science fiction instead of like kind of a just information being communicated. But there you go, they all sound like this.
If Diaz's recollection is correct, this is an exceptional maneuver for any aircraft.
Lo cual nunca antes habíamos visto ni el controlador de aproximación ni yo.
Diaz and the air traffic controllers could only come to one conclusion.
Supusimos que era el objeto no identificado que él estaba reportando. En ese momento empezamos a comentar y a pensar que parecía que sí era cierto.
This is important testimony. And to me, it's particularly important because it's confirmation of a physical nature. It's radar confirmation. And so it provides independent support for Carlos's story.
That's actually really important to mention, and that's the same in this Tic Tac UFO on the Joe Rogan interview, where they were actually able to track these objects on radar, which indicates a physical object. It's the same, all these pilots, they have internal frequencies where they can call each other. And if one pilot sees something, calls other pilots and says, hey, have you seen that too? And other pilots confirm that sighting. That also lends more credibility to it rather than just one guy or maybe 2 pilots seeing a thing. So that's a really important point to mention.
At 35,000 feet, Goodnow and his pilot are heading right toward the object.
What was the distance between you and that object that you saw?
Within 20 miles.
Okay. So close enough to really get
close enough that we were getting nervous.
Boy, how do you know that? Like, what's your point of reference to say, 20 miles? Is there an object, like an airplane that's behind the object, that's further away than 20 miles? Did you see it on radar? Was it like, where does that 20 miles come from? It's very hard to track distances in the air. If you're in the cockpit and you see an object, it can really trick you how far it is away. Same as it can trick you how high you are above water, for example. If you're flying over water, it's hard to say if you're 20 meters above the water or 100 meters above the water. It's nearly impossible, actually. So I'm not sure how he measured that distance. I mean, he's a trained observer, I guess, but...
Okay. I imagine flying at the speed you guys fly, 20 miles comes up pretty quick.
It does.
Were any reports filed?
I did file something, never heard back. And I hear from other pilots that did the same thing, that's kind of a common theme. When you make these calls or you file these reports, there are never follow-ups.
Any targets up here? We just had something go right over the top of us that, I hate to say this, looked like a long cylindrical object. It almost looked like a cruise missile type of thing moving really fast that went right over the top of us.
So be aware, like this is really interesting, because if you make a call to air traffic control from your aircraft and say something like that, you're risking all kinds of things. I'm sure these pilots thought about it several times. And even he says, you know, I hate to say this, but this is what I just saw. Because on one hand, you have to report it. You know, it's crucial that you're honest and you report it because it can pose a risk to other aircraft. But at the same time, you run the risk of other people saying, what is he on? You know, what is he taking to see stuff like this? Is he even like, let's put a drug test on the guy as soon as he lands. You risk your credibility as a pilot. You potentially risk your job by sending out a message like that. So again, lends a bit of credibility to it, just sending a message out like that, because it risks a lot. It's not something that air traffic control is going to take lighthearted.
UFO historian David Clarke showed me the radar tracks of another sighting in 1991. The one we've highlighted was the unexplained object seen by an AlItalia pilot approaching Heathrow.
The pilot and the co-pilot saw this object like what they described as a cruise missile-shaped object zooming across in front of the cockpit, and the pilot immediately shouted out, look out, to his companion.
Captain Terauchi describes the...
Right, that's a different case, but it's like, it looked like a cruise missile. Maybe it just was a cruise missile, okay? Maybe it was some kind of missile, some kind of test that we just don't know about. Like, if it looks like a cruise missile, I'm not sure it's right in this documentary, right? Because it probably was some kind of missile.
Main craft is being twice the size of an American aircraft carrier.
Deviate from orbit, heading 240. Spinner 1628 Heavy. Deviation is approved as necessary for traffic. It's quite a big, like a formation. Spinner 1628, sir, do you still have the traffic? Disappear, Spinner 1628. Spinner 1628, I understand you do not see the traffic any longer. Okay.
Moments later, an urgent message comes in from Elmendorf Air Force Base. The unidentified object now appears on their radar.
Yeah, that's 1-2 again. We have confirmed there is a flight size of 2 around here, 1550 squawk, one primary return only. Okay, where is he following us? It looks like he is, yes. Okay,
777. Yeah.
Right. So that's interesting. That's actually like that Japan Air, I think it was Japan Air, the case we just saw. It's a legendary case as well. So, you know, the way he described it, there are longer interviews in the full documentary, and it's just huge. It's like twice the size of a normal aircraft, and it was very, very close to their, I don't know what it was, like a 747 or something. So that's actually insane, right? Because if it's that close right next to it and it followed them for quite a while, like less than like 200, 300, 400 feet or something away. So that's quite a remarkable case. And again, he also called it in through air traffic control, which, like I said, risks his credibility and all that. So I believe those two guys, they're Dutch pilots, if I'm not mistaken. How long have you been a pilot? Let me read this out to you guys, because it's all in Dutch. How long have you guys been a pilot? 31 years. You had sightings. A sighting. When was it? It was 25 years ago, but I remember it as if it was yesterday, because it was so remarkable. I saw a blue flash shoot past our airplane. A flash, more like something the size of a moon or a bit smaller. Like of the moon, obviously. It caught up with us. And we flew around 800, 900 kilometers per hour. But this went 2-3 times as fast as we were. And you could say it might have been a fighter jet or the exhaust of a fighter jet, but it instantly stopped. And then from one moment to the other, I cannot say how big it was. It was hard to estimate in the air. Thank you very much. Okay, lends credibility again. If he says, I cannot really say how big it was because it's hard to estimate that stuff in the air. The other guy's like, it's 20 miles away, easy. I prefer people who remain skeptical. It just, again, credibility-wise, it's a bit more believable. It flew a bit higher than us, he says. We were about 34,000 feet, which is about 10 kilometers height. And this object was estimated to be roughly 15 kilometer in height. But the most bizarre thing was that it rushed by and then came to a dead stop, stood still for a few seconds, and then from the right to the left stood still again for a few seconds, and then it shot off to the left side of our aircraft, and then we couldn't see it anymore. We were both flabbergasted, literally, and speechless, which I can imagine. So I decided to talk about it on the radio, and we have an inter-pilot frequency, like I mentioned before, and pilots speak among each other. And so I asked the other pilots, has anyone seen any blue lights? And I received an immediate response, yes. While I say this, I feel very shivery because I was so relieved, so to say, to know that I'm not crazy. And for me, it was unexplainable. So that's also crazy, isn't it? I mean, you could say, like he said, I like that he actually said it could have been the exhaust of a jet or something, right? That just goes by really, really fast. But then it stopped and then moved to the left and then shot back, apparently, if I understood it correctly, shot back the opposite direction, which is insane, okay? This is kind of going against the rules of geological phenomenon, of rockets, any jet aircraft. That's a remarkable report.
To Albany in a Trilander. I had noticed Ray looking out through the windscreen with his binoculars, which is quite unusual.
I saw Ray turn around and talk to someone behind him while we were flying. Now, it wasn't worrying from the standpoint of flying, but it was unusual. And he was gesturing to something down below.
On nearing the object, a second identical shape appeared beyond the first. Both objects were of a flattened disc shape with a dark area to the right. They were brilliant yellow with light emanating from within, and I estimated them to be up to possibly a mile across.
I pointed it out to John. He had to lean across me to be able to see it.
It was like that.
Like a Tic Tac, right? Kind of in line with what a lot of other people say. I mean, he's just a passenger, but he saw it too, so...
This was a big object in the sky, very, very big object. And I didn't want to be too close to it. So it was at that time anyway where we had to descend to land. And with both objects still visible and to a lot of the passengers in the back of the aircraft, we descended through the 2,000-foot haze layer and lost sight of it.
So Ray, why didn't you bring this to the attention of your passengers? I mean, normally when a pilot sees something of interest, he says, if you look out to your left, you'll see...
Yeah, New York.
That's such a dumb question. If you see something like that, you wouldn't announce it to your passengers, right? That could cause panic and all kinds of worry in the passengers. Oh, on the left side, you can now see what could be an alien spacecraft. Very rare sighting. Please look out to the left. Nobody would do that.
It was a little bit far away from me. Well, it was, I didn't want to alarm anybody at that point. There again, as we got closer to these objects, there was no hiding it. They were just there.
Wow, okay, so loads of credible reports there, loads of good stuff. The one in the end, actually, I can give a little bit of an anecdote. I spoke to a pilot once, and I asked him, I said, have you ever seen anything out of the ordinary, anything crazy? And he said, well, once we were starting the airplane, like a commercial airplane in Japan, and you kind of start towards Mount Fuji. And as they were starting, there was like what you would call a Fata Morgana, like a reflection of the light of Mount Fuji. And suddenly he said he saw Mount Fuji mirrored in the sky. And it looked like a cone-shaped mirrored object that was hovering in the sky. And obviously they knew it wasn't anything extraordinary. It was just like a light reflection, basically. So when he describes this, I don't know if it could be something like that. Again, like an extremely rare phenomenon that just occurs once in, 30,000 hours of flight. But stuff like that happens where things get mirrored in the sky and reflections of cities. If he says it's a bright, glowing orange or yellow object, it could be a reflection of cities and stuff. So I don't know. This again could be many different things, but there are cases in there that are just unbelievable, especially when a pilot says the one that with the submarine just stuck with me, right? Like a giant cigar-shaped object that just goes in front of your window and it looks literally like a submarine in the deep sea. Holy smokes, man. That's insane. But there's really good stuff in there. Guys, I want to know what you think. First of all, have you ever seen anything? You know, don't be ashamed. Share it down in the comments. I'm quite curious to hear it. Even if it's just a small thing that you couldn't explain. Nobody's going to ridicule you. I just want to know if you guys ever seen anything. And also, what are your thoughts on all of these reports, right? Do you think it's credible? Do you think people are just looking for attention? Do you think people just want to write a book after retirement and then make a lot of money with that? I'm sure that's the case with some of these people. In my opinion, like I said in the beginning, a lot of these reports are much more credible than the average video that we're seeing out there that shows drones or airplanes or satellites or a geological phenomenon. But anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave all that down in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you subscribe and smash the like button. I hope to see you in another video. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourself. Happy Halloween, and I'm out. Bye.